Greetings, friends, and welcome to another installment of Difficult Scriptures Finally Explained. Well, it is time to explain once and for all the difficult scriptures recorded in Genesis chapter 6, verse 19, related to the Noah's Ark. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 19, we read, "And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort thou shalt bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female." Now, some people think that it is unrealistic and even unscientific to believe that Noah could have saved all animals in the ark. And they also wonder, how could Noah get 2 of each of the millions of animal species into the ark? Well, here is the explanation. Basically, this is a standard objection that critics frequently level at the biblical record of the Great Flood. In fact, they like to ridicule the thought of Noah setting off on trapping expeditions to Alaska and Australia, and they especially seem to relish the thought of the insuperable difficulties encountered by Noah's family in feeding and cleaning up after the animals during the year in the ark. Traditional images and popular literature picture the ark as scarcely larger than an ordinary fishing smack. Now, Genesis chapter 6, verse 15, friends, gives the dimensions of the ark. So please take note what it says. Genesis chapter 6, verse 15. "The length of the ark should be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. Now, what is 1 cubit? Well, it says that the length of the ark should be 300 cubits. That should be 137.16 meters based on a cubit, which is 45.72 centimeters long, or 450 feet based on an 11-inch cubit. It is commonly, of course, accepted length. So 300 cubits will be 337.16 meters. That's the length of the ark. We have just read that the breadth of the ark is 50 cubits, which would be 22.86 meters or 75 feet. And the height, it says of it, 30 cubits, which would be 13.71 meters or 45 feet. So when you take into the account the dimensions of the ark, we basically have the following. So the length, 300 cubits, which equals 137.16 meters or 450 feet. Breadth of the ark was 50 cubits, which is 22.86 meters, which equals to 75 feet. And the height of the ark was 30 cubits, which is 13.71 meters or 45 feet. Now, the volume of the ark. If we take into account the volume of the ark, we have the following measures. We have 30 times 50 times 30 equals 450,000 cubits on third. If we translate that into meters, we have 137.16 meters times 22.86 meters times 45 equals 42,987.40 meters on third. So 42,987.40 meters on third. If we translate these measures, this volume of the ark into feet, we have 450 times 75 times 45, which equals 1,518,750 feet on third. That is 1,518,750 feet on third. Now, having all these volumes and measures into account, on this basis, the volumetric carrying capacity of the ark can be calculated to show that the box-shaped ark, because ark actually means box or chest in the Hebrew language, So the box-shaped ark was ocean liner size in cubic capacity, at least the equivalent of that of 522 standard American railroad stock or freight cars. Again, 522 standard American railroad stock cars or freight cars. So the ark had a volume of about 42,900 cubic meters, or 1,518,750 cubic feet, and virtually the entire capacity of the ark could be used for storage, because the ark had no engine room or fuel tanks, you see. But still the question is, could Noah get all those animals into the ark? A standard stock car can transport 240 sheep, so the ark could have carried at least 125,000 sheep. The average dry land animal undoubtedly is considerably smaller than a sheep, as there are only a few large animals. Now the ark had to transport only land animals, of course, so that the mammals, birds, and reptiles were essentially all that needed accommodations. The ark was constructed in 3 stories, and each was fitted with rooms or nests, as we read in Genesis chapter 6, verse 14. So evidently, those rooms or nests, there were tiers of cages or stalls to store the different kinds of animals. Now God specifically instructed Noah to select 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal and 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal. We see that instruction in Genesis chapter 7, verse 2. Now the Bible term kind refers generally to a group of creatures, all of which interbreed. So you see, the horse kind could be represented therefore by 1 pair of animals having the genetic potential to produce after the flood all varieties we have today. The same would be true also for all dogs, cats, and so on. Now the Genesis kind is undoubtedly a more flexible term than our biological species. However, even assuming they are the same, there is not very many species of mammals, birds, amphibians, and reptiles. So the systematic biology says their number is 17,600. Now recognizing that only kinds, not species, were included, and allowing for 2 of each unclean kind on the ark, plus 7 of the few so-called clean kinds of animals, plus a reasonable increment for known extinct species, it is obvious that not more than, say, 50,000 animals were on the ark. Most animals are unclean, as we read in Leviticus chapter 11, so most animal kinds would have been represented by 1 pair. This is obviously much less than 125,000 that could easily have been carried by the ark, and therefore also ample room for food storage and for living quarters for Noah and his family. Only air-breathing terrestrial animals were included in the ark. We read in Genesis chapter 7, verse 22, it says, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, which means that this excluded all sea creatures and simple forms of life which could survive the deluge. Now consider this. Only 40% of the animal kingdom lives on land, and 70% of all species of land animals are insects. The remaining 30% of the terrestrial animal kingdom are, on a mean average, the size of a rhesus monkey. Most animals can be maintained in small confinement for long periods and remain healthy. A rhesus monkey, for example, can be maintained in a cage about 75 centimeters or 30-inch cubed with a capacity for 0.42 cubic meters, which is 15.69 cubic feet. Now, if there were 40,000 animals whose average size is that of rhesus monkey on the ark, how much room in the ark would be needed for all these animals? Well, about 40% of the ark's capacity would suffice, because keep into consideration this: 40,000 animals times 0.42 cubic meters equals 16,800 cubic meters out of 49,000 available. Or 40,000 animals times 15.69 cubic feet equals 627,600 cubic feet out of 1.5 million cubic feet. Now what about insects? Well, remember that the Ark had a storage capacity of 522 standard railroad freight cars. 200 cars would be occupied by mammals, birds, and reptiles. Giving every pair of known species of insects 16 cubic inches of space, another 21 such freight cars would be required. Now, counting Genesis kinds only, the required space would be far less, of course. And so, viewed from the perspective of simple arithmetic, only about half of the space on the 3 decks would have provided plenty of room to accommodate all those animals. And that left the other half of the ship for food and supplies and for Noah and his family. In fact, the ark was so commodious and large that the story makes sense only if the flood were a universal flood. The ark was far too large for only local animals. For that matter, if the flood were only local, no ark would have been needed at all. The problem of preserving human and animal life could have been solved far more easily by merely moving out of the endangered flood plains. As far as the problem of obtaining the animals is concerned, God solved this merely by sending them to Noah. If you know Genesis chapter 6, verse 20, you'll find that fact. So by sending them to Noah, Noah didn't have to go searching for them at all. Now we all know from the science that animals can migrate long distances, especially when impelled to do so by imminent weather changes. Now these still mysterious instincts were implanted somehow within those animals God wanted preserved, and he thus caused them to come unto Noah and the place of safety from the gathering storm. Once they were safely on board, lodged in their stalls and properly fed, most of them very likely settled down for a long period of dormancy or hibernation. The sudden darkness and chill in the air when the sluiceways of heaven were opened quite probably set in action those remarkable physiological powers which seem to be shared in some degree by all orders of the animal kingdom. Now the animal world seems to have, in fact, these two remarkable mechanisms for coping with unfavorable climatic conditions, namely migration and hibernation. Modern biology, despite much study, has still been unable to provide a satisfactory explanation for the origin and operation of these fantastic capabilities. The known facts fit the hypothesis that God imparted these abilities, perhaps by new information conveyed to the genetic code at this time, to those animals selected by him to go to the ark, and their new hibernation mechanisms enabled them to pass the awful year of the deluge in relative quiet and comfort. The descendants of those animals that went forth from the ark have all inherited these capacities, these capabilities in a greater or lesser degrees, still enabling them as necessary to escape unfavorable environmental conditions by one or both mechanisms. Before the flood, it is likely that there was a worldwide warm, pleasant climate. This is indicated both by the fact that such a climate is implied in the fossils and sediments from practically all the so-called geological ages prior to the Pleistocene Ice Age, and also by the fact that the Bible record of the waters above the firmament points to a great antediluvian canopy of invisible water vapor in the upper atmosphere, which would have produced just such a greenhouse effect all over the world. Thus, my dear friends, before the flood, Animals had no need for migration and hibernation, and probably all kinds of animals were dispersed more or less uniformly all over the world. When the thermal vapor blanket condensed and precipitated at the time of the flood, there was a rapid change of climate, which led finally to the Ice Age and then eventually to the present climate regimes of the world. Evidence and documentation for all the above and many other aspects of the Great Flood are given in various books and documentaries. So once again, evidences and documentations for all the above and many other aspects of the Great Flood are given in various books and documentaries. It is recognized that this is a minority view in science. As a matter of fact, true followers of Christ represent a minority in any field. But yet, there are many scientists, that is, who agree with it in all essentials. In any case, the actual observed facts agree with the Great Flood, so far as known at present. Now, the decision to accept or reject any part of the biblical record, as it is confirmed as fully historical and factual, even in its stories of creation and the flood by Christ and his apostles in the New Testament. So the decision to accept or reject any part of the Bible is therefore not a scientific decision at all, but it is actually a spiritual decision. So I hope that this now once and for all settles this question about the Great Flood, universal Great Flood, and about the Ark of Noah, which saved all the known animal kinds.